Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tegan Gourmet. I'm a proud Arraban woman and have had the privilege of working across many different lands and living on many different lands throughout Australia, from Awabakal country, Wadjuk, Wadjamup, Yarru, to name a few. And today I'm on lovely Biripi country. So before we begin, I want to acknowledge country and the custodians who have cared for country for thousands of years. It's important to recognise that no matter where you are joining us from today in Australia, we are all on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands. And there is a traditional owner group who continues their cultural obligations to care for country and speak for country. We acknowledge with deep respect the lands in which we are on and our fellow countrymen and women who join us today. We also acknowledge all elders past, present and emerging whom have given us the opportunity to have this discussion today. I'd love to hear from all of you guys, the audience, where you're joining us from today. So please tell us who you are, your organisation and what country you're on. You can access the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that there's a couple of little things already in chat at the moment. We also have panellists joining us today from all across Australia, including Willie, who's actually on the Tiwi Islands. They are expecting quite a storm, so his visual might drop in and out, but we'll try and maintain Willie's connection. We may just have audio for him, so please bear up with us as we continue. You know, as some of you guys will know, this is the first webinar of a series hosted by the Threatened Species Recovery Hub. The series is Indigenous Caring for Country and Working and Learning Together for Species and Places. The link of which for the full series will be posted in the chat. As most of you are aware, today's webinar also coincides with NAIDOC Week, which this year's theme is Always Was and Always Will Be, recognising that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. The Indigenous Caring for Country series will look at taking care of country right across Australia and the work underway by Indigenous communities to integrate Indigenous knowledge, values and priorities into education, their livelihoods and Western science. The next webinar series or webinar session is Growing Respect for Culture and Significant Species in Schools, and it will be held next Tuesday the 17th, starting an hour later. For me personally, this year's theme always was and always will be, and these webinar series marks just how far we've come. When I started my undergrad, Indigenous knowledge was seldomly considered or recognised. Today, we see scientists with a new energy and passion to promote the value of traditional ecological knowledge. So we have quite a few different people from Kulin nations. Oh, I've gotten lots of ones. I did just see Darwin pop up, Larkira, Gamilaroi, so all over, great to see. Yamaji. Wow, so exciting. In addition to the chat function, we're also going to have a Q&A, which is also at the bottom of your screen. So we'd love to hear from you guys. We'll be closing off, oh, Anna Wabakal, we'll be closing off the chat in a few moments. But by clicking on this button, on the Q&A button, it'll bring up a panel where you can ask questions directly to our speakers and panelists during the second half of the webinar. You'll also be able to see and like other people's questions. So we're expecting quite a few questions, given that we've got nearly 100 participants. So if you see a question you like, please feel free to upvote it by liking it, and we will try and prioritise those questions and get to as many as we can. At the end of the session, we'll also be sending around a resource pack to everyone registered with extra information for anything we don't get covered today. So let's jump on into it. Our first speaker is Brad Mogridge, whose career has been focused around Aboriginal people and water. He has invested a lot of time in promoting Indigenous research and integrating Indigenous perspectives and into Western science, including as the Indigenous Liaison Officer for the Threatened Species Recovery Hub. Today, Brad is showcasing the Indigenous engagement protocol that he developed to guide threatened species researchers. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Egan. Yeah, look, I'm just going to run through the little short presentation on the protocols. It's got a bit of a story to it, and obviously it had a history. And I'm actually coming to you live from Ngunnawal country, so I'll rip right in, and I will swap. How's that? Beautiful. Okay, yeah. Look, I'll talk briefly about these protocols and where they've come from and what they've got to offer, and I suppose the aim of what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm on Ngunnawal country. I'm a Kamilaroi man from northwest New South Wales, and yeah, I'm currently at the University of Canberra, and obviously we've got NAIDOC week this week, and always was, always will be, and I always add water after that. So that's my area of speciality. So it's I think the main one is always was, always will be Aboriginal land, but always will be Aboriginal water as well. So here it is, the launch of the Indigenous Engagement Protocols for Threatened Species Researchers. So it was launched earlier it was produced earlier this year, and it's available on the Threatened Species Recovery website, and it's out there for people. It definitely does have extra, there are common protocols that will occur across different areas of science and engagement and government. And so, there are common themes through this document that you might see in other documents as well. So the need for such a protocol, the answer was yes. Where did it come from? So we had a early career researcher forum in 2018, and I think it was at a place in Currumbin in Queensland, and there was a pterodactyl or something out the front. So it was, that's what I remember. But there was a huge mob of early career researchers, and I sort of was there presenting as the Indigenous Liaison Officer for the hub, and talking about sort of some cultural protocols that I follow throughout my career and what I've learned, and also some of the challenges, some of the issues. And then out of the forum, there was a definite request for such a protocol, to give early career researchers an idea of what they're up against, but also some tricks of the trade, I suppose you could say, on how to start thinking about engaging with Aboriginal people. And we'll hear from Hugh a bit later, and he was one of the attendees, and we had a panel session straight after my session, and it was a really good interactive, and there was some really good questions. So I suppose the need for that come out, and it was strongly supported by the hub's Indigenous reference group, which Tegan is a member of, and obviously the Threatened Species Hub leadership, and also the National Environmental Science Program at the department. So we engage with them as well. So how it was developed, it was really lived experiences, so I tried to write it in a language that that I could understand, and that's pretty basic. And I suppose it was really about what I know, what I've learned, some of the challenges you'll find, and then looking at other resources, as I mentioned below. But thinking about how I would engage a community if I was an early career researcher. So it was really putting myself into their shoes, but also thinking about how I've done it over my career. And then obviously understanding the challenges that they may face, and some of the issues and challenges that they will find themselves, and predicaments. So we'll have some examples of that later on. So we looked at we currently have an Indigenous engagement participation strategy for the hub, and also the department has one as well. And most of the other I think all the other hubs have a participation strategy as well. They were linked very closely to the AATSIS guidelines for ethical research. They've just been updated this year, so they're now live on AATSIS website. And we're also considering components of the Nagoya Protocol, the EPBC Act at a federal level, and also the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People as well. So what's in the protocol? obviously a cultural protocol, and it's you know, this is just sort of a line out of the what are cultural protocols, and it's, you know, it's a set of ethical principles to guide behaviour under certain circumstances when engaging with certain communities. So, you know, it's how you act, how you portray yourself, and how you turn up to a community and start that process. Some of the principles are there, and we'll talk about those a bit later, but, you know, these are key to engaging with Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. There's respect, integrity, and authenticity, accountability, you know, Indigenous led and owned. So, you know, the hub is strong on Indigenous people leading, but also co-leading and co-developing, consent and approval, and then how you communicate, and then the language you use. So some of the processes we thought about were cultural competence and ethics, the terminology we use day to day, and also the terminology we use when we're starting to engage, and whether that's in written form or, you know, you don't want to talk in high scientific language, and, you know, you're going to lose people pretty quickly. The guarantee of service, what you are promising, do you do not overpromise, you know, that's sort of like a generic thing. And reciprocity, I think that was my word of 2019. I loved it. And I think it's, you know, it's what you can give that community. You know, if they're going to engage with you, provide their time and sometimes their knowledge, what is in it for them? You know, I think that's a key one. Cultural practices, and these are just common ones you'll see in a lot of protocols. You know, talking for country, it's always the biggest one. And there's, you know, there are easy ways, and there are also hard ways, and there's some tough communities, and there's challenging issues around who talks for country, and obviously, and then how do we involve elders? You know, that was quite a tricky way to write in the protocols as well. The welcome country ceremony, you know, smoking and water ceremonies, you know, the people, when you seek dancing and in those, from those communities, you know, music. And then we've also got other cultural practices like acknowledgement of country, what wording can be used, respecting men's and women's business, which is very important. You know, me as a male going out to meet with women's probably not ideal, and I think vice versa. The taking of and use of photos, voice recordings, and video. There's protocols around that in a media aspect, and most of the hubs will have that. Respecting sorry business, you know, that's a crucial thing. You know, you might have the best morning tea, you've set up everything, and then obviously you've got lunch and you've got opportunities there, and then someone passes in that community, all bets are off. You know, you've got to go away, you've got to walk away and come back when they're ready. You know, and that time is purely their time. And you know, that's, or, you know, you also need to consider, is there a significant event happening? Like in, say, in New South Wales, we have the Aboriginal Rugby League knockout. You do not have consultation when the knockout's on. You won't get anyone. They're all going to be in one place, and you know, things like that. You know, and if the Tiwi have got their big AFL grand final on, no chance. You're not going to get anyone. Obviously, then there's the aspect of secrecy and sacred material. You know, that's something you need to go talk about early. You know, and I think the aim of these protocols is to get people to think about how to engage early, and make sure that they're thinking about that when they start to talk to people. You know, like I use the 3 T's concept when I try to give people some ideas. You know, you need time to build trust over lots of cups of tea, and I think that's the trust aspect. You know, a lot of those mobs, when you're rocking up on their doorstep with this research idea, they're going to be thinking, can I trust this researcher? What do they want? What are they going to take from me? And I suppose you need to think about that, all those sort of things. We also have some calendar of events, you know, just things that pop up in regular national calendars, you know, the obvious ones, but also, you know, say Threatened Species Day, which people might not know of as well. And then a bit of a checklist at the end to sort of work out, you know, if you've ticked these boxes to make sure that you followed everything. So, you know, have you got an access permit if required? You know, do you have access to that person's country? Have you sought prior informed consent? Ethics approvals from your university or research agency. are you talking in plain English? You know, are you considering the terminology you're using? You know, what that word reciprocity, what are the benefits for your partners that you're going to engage? Have you considered those gender issues, approval to take videos if required, and also, you know, the approval of the to record voice? And then obviously some agencies will go through the process of developing a research agreement. Do you have approval for that? So that'll do me. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks, Brad. You know, it sounds like the protocols are a very thorough document and a great starting point for researchers, particularly new into the field, to have a look at a good starting point. I haven't already mentioned to the audience, please have a quick look at the chat. The direct link to the protocols is in there, so feel free to click through to that and have a bit more look at the document. Also, as mentioned before, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so if you've got any burning questions now for Brad, I suggest you pop them in that Q&A and we'll get to them in the end, and I'll also save my questions as well. So we're going to move on now to our next two speakers, Willie and Hugh. And as I said, you know, Willie is joining us from TI. It looks like his video has dropped out, so he's probably got a bit of a storm front. So we'll continue on hopefully with the audio. So Willie Rioli is a supervisor and mentor for the Tiwi Land Rangers, where he coordinates and leads a range of land management and liaison activities to look after Tiwi country. And Hugh Davies is a researcher in ecology from Charles Darwin University, who has worked with Willie and other Tiwi rangers on providing information to support land management decisions on Tiwi Islands.
Yeah, g'day everyone. Willie, can you hear us all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good, mate. Yeah, so as Tegan mentioned, I'm a NESP-funded postdoc at Charles Darwin University, but I'm actually down in Armidale these days on Anawan country, which I think isn't too far from your country, Brad, Kamilaroi. Yeah, so I've been down here for about a year now. Beautiful country around here. And yeah, so I've been working with Willie since pretty much the start of my PhD, which was over 7 years ago now. And most of the research we've been doing together has focused on increasing our understanding of how fire and feral animals influence native mammal populations on the Tiwis, with the overall goal of providing the information to the Tiwi Land Council that they need to make informed decisions about land use and how best to manage their islands. Yeah, I guess we'll start off with you, Willie. Why don't you introduce yourself and yeah, give us a bit of background.
No worries. Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, thank you for that, Hugh. Hi, my name is Willie Rioli. I'm with the I'm a senior land ranger supervisor / mentor for my land ranger group. So obviously land ranger. So we have two ranger groups. So we have our land rangers, like obviously looking after the land, and sea rangers, which guys, you know, obviously look after the seaside of things. So, you know, it's been, how long since, look, I've been supervising the guys for nearly 10 years now. And, you know, it's a privilege and an honor to do the job that I'm doing and you know, the work with the partnership having with Hugh and quite a number of PhD students over, you know, over a number of years, you know, especially the last 10 years, we've built up good relationship with university from Melbourne and et cetera. So it's been awesome. Yeah. So, and I'm obviously a Munupi man from northwest of Melville Island, and yeah, and just been living on Tiwi most of my life. So
yeah. So how many rangers are you controlling these days, Willie?
Oh, I've been put under pressure a bit more, so to look after both the land and the sea rangers as well. So yeah, so you know, I've got to look after the seaside of guys. So you know, it's been challenging but it's been good to, you know, be able to guide these guys.
Yeah, you're a busy man. What are some of the responsibilities that you know, the Tiwi Land Rangers do when they're on their day-to-day job? What kind of stuff do they do?
Yeah, look, Hugh, most of the day we spend is you know, working with researchers or doing biosecurity activities. So we have a partnership with the biosecurity that used to be the Australian Quarantine Inspector Services guys. Now they're biosecurity, and we do quite a number of their activities in terms of, checking for pests and looking at diseases on animals and things like that, even plants. So that's part of the work as well, but it's also all around everything that land management do, which is, obviously looking after feral animals and weeds to fire. So it's been awesome. Obviously we're, set up, we're one of the last ranger groups that have set up. Obviously there's quite a few ranger groups that have set up in the top end, especially right up from North Queensland to Northern Territory and Western Australia, and I've noticed it's going right down to Tasmania and New South Wales, which is fantastic to see. It's about for me personally, guys, it's an honour being able to look after country. So and I know hearing from other guys that have that especially all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait guys that are working on country, they really enjoy it.
Yeah, so you kind of read my mind there, Willie. I was going to ask you whether, it might be a bit difficult, but whether you would be able to convey to us what your country means to you and why it's so important to look after Tiwi country.
Oh, look, the island means the world to me. So obviously, growing up here from when we were a kid, obviously it's my ancestors' family, home too. So it's just carrying on and looking after the land the best way we can with both Western Science Way and Tiwi Way. Having that connection is very important. We much as that we know a lot about our land, there's other things that, obviously with the, Western science that can bring to us that can, we can work in such a good partnership that helps, maintain looking after country, which is very important for me and my fellow rangers. And for me, it's educating and being a leader for our young kids. There's quite a number of kids, especially around Tiwis and all around the Indigenous community. When they see ranger groups, they all inspire to be rangers. And I see that as an honour and a privilege to be able to show these kids, what we do on land, looking after country. And hopefully, and that's for me personally, it's, looking after country, and it's about maintaining what I've got today. So our our grandchildren and their children can, do the same, hunt and basically, do the same thing what we're doing today.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Willie. Last question. What do you reckon the biggest management issues are that you face on the Tiwi Islands, like that the land rangers are most concerned about?
Yeah, look, it's obviously cats is the number one thing, mate. Cats and all feral animals, and like you got wild boars as well, pigs up here as well, trying to control them, and obviously we got horses. That's on Bathurst, and on Melville Island we have carnivores. Obviously the horses and the buffaloes on that side, so it's quite different. Different land on that side, and so trying to control them and trying to weed out the obviously the feral cats that are out there, which are a danger to our to our environment and also to our native wildlife out there, which a lot of us hunt for, so like the bandicoots and the possums and things like that. So and
it's a big job, because for those the listeners out there who don't really know much about the Tiwi Islands, they're big islands. Like Melville's the second biggest island in Australia, Bathurst is the fifth, so there's a lot of country that they're trying to look after, and there's a range of threats, as Willie mentioned. Ferals and fire needs to be managed as well, so they've got their work cut out for them, and that's probably a good segue into where I see myself in the research that I've done as helping the land rangers and Tiwi community address these unknowns and help develop ways to manage them. But I might just quickly share a bit of a backstory about how I ended up actually working on the Tiwi Islands, because I think it's a pretty good example of how not to do it, and it's really relevant to this webinar. And really highlights the importance of Brad's work and these Indigenous engagement protocols. Yeah, so back in 2013 is when I saw this PhD project advertised to study the impact of fire on small mammals in the North Kimberley. And I'd been to the North Kimberley about a year prior, and I just thought, wow, what an amazing place to work, and I couldn't wait to get back out there. So, you know, signed up for the PhD and started, and then within 2 months, I was out on Woonabulgumbura country, around the Mitchell Plateau, around Mitchell Falls, up to Columbaroo area, and I was camping out in a little community called Candywell, meeting some awesome people and seeing some amazing country, and you know, chatting with everyone, trying to get my research up and running, and yeah, just trying to get the project moving. But it became clear pretty quickly that the research questions that my PhD was aiming to answer weren't really high priority questions for them, and there were many other questions that they would rather that they wanted answered. So discussions went on, and things take time. It was all amicable, all really nice, but things were moving slowly, and we found ourselves in a situation where we just weren't going to get the project up and running in time. So we unfortunately had to kind of pull the pin in our plans to work in the North Kimberley and try and find somewhere else to work, which, you know, at that stage I was about 5 months into my PhD, so pretty scary to be at that point and not having anywhere to actually work and not having anyone, proper engagement underway. But yeah, so within a few months of my PhD, I was very familiar with the difficulties you can run into when, you know, the research isn't directly developed in close collaboration with a TO group. You know, looking back, I was, you know, a stranger. I didn't know anyone there, coming in with a project which was, you know, had a clear direction already developed, and that direction wasn't a priority. So looking back, it wasn't really a surprise that it was going to be difficult. And, you know, if it was to work, we were going to need many more months of just sitting down, talking, building that respect, that trust, and working together to kind of shape the project into something that, you know, ticked the boxes of everyone involved, which is absolutely essential in a proper collaboration. And unfortunately, that was time we just didn't really have. You know, I had already started my PhD. Ideally, this would be done in the development of the ideas before you even apply for funding, let alone after someone starts their study. So it was a bit of a trial by fire for me, but yeah, steep learning curve, and one that stuck with me. And yeah, so I found myself pretty much looking around for somewhere to study the effect of fire on native mammals. And lucky for me, I had a chat with Alan Anderson, and he pointed out that there was this ongoing collaboration between the Tiwi Land Council and CSIRO, and they were running a replicated fire experiment. And at that point, no one was actually studying the effect of these experimental fires on native mammals. And after chatting with a bunch of people, they were really keen to have me involved, because the research I could conduct would actually answer some of the questions that they wanted to know, which is, you know, perfect. And so that was really the beginning of my work on the Tiwis. From there, my PhD research evolved over the years. The more I got to know Willie, the more I got to know the land ranges and the broader community, and the better they got to know me. We were able to shape my project in a way that not only answered some cool scientific questions, but actually provided the information that they actually wanted and needed. Yeah, so in 2015, we just conducted a big health check of the mammals on Melville Island. And that work it kind of showed some worrying results, in that mammals might be showing some initial signs of decline. And because of that work, people in community started becoming more aware and concerned that, you know, something isn't quite right. And if we're not careful, a a bunch of mammal species might be lost from the Tiwis, as they have in many other areas of Australia, which is terribly sad. But those results were kind of coming out at the end of my PhD, and that could easily have been kind of the end of my involvement on the Tiwis. We didn't have any ongoing funding to keep this stuff, rolling. And if it had turned out that that was the end of our collaboration, it would have been incredibly sad for me personally, because we'd established all these amazing relationships, and we're doing some great work. To suddenly have to say, all right, see you later, it just would have been really heartbreaking and probably really frustrating for, Tiwi mob. And I reckon it's a pretty common occurrence in collaborations. I wasn't too keen on simply pointing out problems. I really wanted to stick around and help where I could solve some problems. And so the NESP funding through the Threatened Species Recovery Hub popped up at just the perfect time, around 2018. And since then, we've been working together. We just continued the work, and we've been focused on understanding, populations of feral cats in a lot more detail, and how they're affected by fire and feral herbivores. But yeah, I think these days we've reached a point where all the work that we've done over the last 7 years, and even stretching back further than that, past researchers, it's all coming together in a really strong collaboration, which is feeding into a big linkage grant, which was developed and designed by the Tiwi Land Council to assist them in making land management decisions, taking into account economics, social and cultural values, as well as ecological values. So I feel like we're at a point now where we're really hitting our strides in terms of a great collaboration. And as pointed out in Brad's work, the Indigenous led and owned importance of projects. I feel like we're really there now, and it's just, I could go on for hours, but that's about 7 years of hard work wrapped up in 10 minutes or so. But yeah, I just wanted to outline, it's been a bit of a roller coaster over the years, but that's kind of just the way it is, sadly, and we've been able to get something really great out of it. So yeah, I'll just leave it there for now, and we'll move on to the next part of the webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Hugh, and thanks, Willie. I think you guys shared some really great insights. And Willie, I love your passion for working on country and that really intimate understanding of the place that you belong to. And I think, Will, you really raised some interesting points that link directly back to the protocols. We're talking about building those respects and making sure it's a true collaboration, issues with, funding cycles and how they can actually do a lot more damage than what I suppose policy settings and governments of the day, or wherever the funding may be coming from, actually realise on the ground. So what we thought we would do for the audience today is actually to kind of walk through the engagement protocols the engagement principles from the protocols that have been developed by Brad, and we'll share an overview of those six principles. And what we aim to do is to talk through the intent of each of the principles, and then for Willie and Hugh to add some on-ground perspective to how they would have done that in their project and the lessons learnt and that sort of thing. So Brad, we'll start off with you.
You want me to I'll run through these principles? Yeah, look, there.
If you just go, sorry, Brad, if you just go one at a time.
Yeah, sure.
Then we can talk to them. Yeah.
Yep. I missed the memo.
Sorry.
I'm just joking. The respect one is obviously a huge one, and that's the thing where we see in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the same level, and their knowledge accepted at the same level as Western science and Western methodologies. And they're if you build that respect with those communities, you're going to get response from those communities. And I think it's a challenge for researchers to come in with a perception that these communities have a lot to offer, but you need to respect that they're on their country, and you also need to respect that you are entering their world, and you need to make sure that you are honouring that. You know, I suppose that other thing of you know whose country it is, and you know, trying to understand, do a bit of background research on the history of that place. And you know, like you might work for an organisation that's got a bad rap in that community, and you need to think about that. Or you might have a good rap, and you don't want to mess that up. So I suppose it's you know, it's what you do and how you do it, and I think respect comes straight through that.
Right. So in regards to your project, Hugh and Willie, how did you treat that aspect?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, no, I think I mean it's the number one thing, you know, like right around that, Brad. So, you know, in terms of getting, you know, both the PhD students or any researchers that come over, is having a little bit of understanding and have a bit of, you know, which is great with, you know, Hugh's able to, you know, get that, you know, good relationship with my ranger groups, fellow rangers, and it's been, you know, obviously, and having that respect for land, which is obviously a priority, and just treating everybody, you know, yeah, with a bit, you know, a bit of dignity and a bit of respect, which has been a number one goal of ours, and it's been, you know, it's been wonderful, and knowing the place, you know, obviously with, if you don't know, you know, always ask a question, and it's what, you know, a lot of your, you know, a lot of the PhD students have been fantastic, and all our researchers and other partners, you know, that come over and work, if they don't know, they always ask the question.
Thanks, Willie. Did you have anything to add, Hugh?
Not really. I guess I went in very aware of what I don't know. You know, I was, you know, just a newly fresh-faced PhD person. So, you know, to be on someone's country who's been there for thousands of years, it just, you know, knowing at that and just tapping into that knowledge and taking the time to ask, and, well, building the trust first and then being able to ask stuff, like, you'd be, like, as a Western scientist, you'd be crazy not to tap into that knowledge. Like, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to value it, and to value it from the outset, for sure. Brad, did you want to move on to the next one?
Yep, and I think respect is built around, you know, especially around integrity and authenticity of a researcher. You know, you come in and you start talking to people and having lots of cups of tea and morning teas, and you bring the flash cakes and nice fruit, and you know, you're starting having a yarn with the billy on the fire, and I think you start building that, and Aboriginal people will see you for who you are, and I think that is always be you. Don't come in to these communities and try and be someone else. You don't want to be Brad Mogridge, you know, they'll see straight through you. And I think you've got to be you. And I think that's really important, you know, and then obviously you move on to that key aspect of, you know, working with the community to identify the right people. And then the challenge is, if you talk to the wrong people, that could be the end of your project. If you talk to the right people, it could be the loudest person in that community, but they may be the wrong person. It could be, you know, the quiet uncle sitting, or auntie sitting in the back of the room. They could be the right person, but you've got to try and work that out. It takes a while for that, and I think you know, that integrity is important, especially in these communities. You know that, and I think you know, Hugh would have built a lot of respect and integrity because he had the courage to walk away. You know, it would have been tough for him to walk away from his PhD project. Yeah. But you know, that sort of stuff it would have been tough for him. You know, I've no doubt, and I think it's something that is very important in engagement.
Thanks, Brad. Willie, from your context, I mean, the Tiwis have a very complex governance structure. From anyone looking from the outside in, you know, you've got your land council, you've also got your regional council, and then obviously, as Brad said, you've got your elders who hold a lot of traditional ecological knowledge that is specific to their cultural obligations. What would your advice?
It's a bit stormy. I don't know if you can hear me, but yeah.
Yep, we can hear you. What would your advice
Yeah,
be?
it's actually a big storm.
Oh, you might
Yeah,
not be
sorry.
able.
Look, I can't hear anything because obviously internet problem. There's a big storm brewing out there.
No worries.
Sorry, I can't hear nothing.
We'll ask Hugh if he can answer that one. How did you approach making sure you were having the right people involved with Willie, with the Tiwi project?
Well, I probably followed Willie around like a bad smell, and just followed his leadership. He was instrumental in introducing me to the right people and directing the research. And so to find someone like Willie, who, you know, is respected in community and knows the right people to talk to, and was just a good go-between for everything I needed to do.
Yeah, that's great. So important to leverage on established relationships within communities.
Yeah, and there was already, you know, regular meetings and stuff that had been established. Like the Tiwis have a regular meeting with the University of Melbourne. They've got this kind of scientific reference committee, which is all formal and people are taking minutes and stuff like that. So, you know, there's the fact that they've got those kind of things in place already makes researchers' jobs a lot easier. I could only imagine it would be incredibly tough in other areas that don't have those kind of things set up.
Yeah, great. Brad, did you want to move on to the next one?
Yep. Accountability. I find that's another. All these 6 that we're listing here are super important. And you know, frequent communications and project updates. You know, be upfront. Don't be a one-visit wonder. Don't turn up and expect everything and walk away with knowledge. That's just not going to happen these days. And a lot of these mobs have been burnt before, so they're going to be very wary of, or they may not have been burnt before, but you know, they're going to be very wary of researchers coming in. The other thing is never overpromise that on things that you cannot deliver. And if you do promise something and something happens, you know, you lose your funding or you change positions or you move departments, then you need to be upfront with that mob and just tell them straight up, you know, this is what's happened. Because if you hide behind projects, you're gonna lose them. And I think that's really important as well, that you maintain that information back and forth.
Great. Hugh and Willie, how were you guys accountable to the community when you were throughout the project?
You want me to answer that one, Willie?
He's frozen.
Yeah, if you
there he is.
quickly, I can say something. Sorry, guys, I've got a bit of a big storm. I've got a big storm brewing out there, so that's why I'm sort of cutting in and out.
No worries.
Have all times that come now. Sorry, Hugh, you want to go first?
Oh, it was just yeah, they want to know about kind of how we.
Sorry, Hugh, you want to go first?
Yeah, no worries, mate. I guess, yeah, as Brad says, frequent, you know, back and forth, open and honest feedback about what's working, what's not. And again, a lot of that, like we did through many different, I guess, we reported to the community in many different ways. And one of those was the Scientific Reference Committee, where it's a meeting that's held twice a year between, you know, the high up TO elders and researchers. And, you know, we're giving constant formal updates to them about how we're doing, and we pitch potential future directions. And it's actually where, you know, new projects and stuff are first kind of discussed, and they'll either be followed through from there, or, you know, if they're not listed as important, then they won't really get up. So that was one way to communicate and be accountable to the high ups in community. And then through, you know, there's newsletters that get distributed around the communities every couple of months. So we'd write articles in that, and yeah, that's a good way to, I guess, reach the broader community. There's always the pub. You can just go there and have a beer, and, you know, that's a good way to talk about your results. And then, you know, we've tied in with the schools across the islands, so getting the kids while they're young, you know, getting them interested in science, getting them, and not just science, about, you know, Tiwi animals, and, you know, it's a good way to get them really interested and wanting to learn more about their culture. And yeah. What do you reckon?
Yeah, like obviously, sorry guys, yeah, just a bit more. Yeah, that's many ways, obviously, you know, like you can do that through our, yeah, like you said, through the newsletter, but, you know, and also like through our word of mouth, through our ranger guys, always, you know, always go to the elders and let them know who's around and the work, you know, the research, and it's just relevant to go, you know, communicate to the right TOs and the, you know, the leaders of those areas. So, yep.
Perfect, thanks, Willie. And Brad, the next one, which is Indigenous led and owned.
Yeah, that's another massive one, and I think the hub has been very instrumental in leading in this regard. You know, it's something that, you know, we are aiming for. It's in our participation strategy, and I think it's crucial to the way we do business. It's making sure that, you know, it's some, you know, NESP was up and running before we could talk to some of the mobs. So the challenge is then trying to establish ways that traditional knowledge can be brought into some of these projects, and also, you know, the as we move towards the end of NESP 1, we you know, there's a lot of good stories to tell, and, you know, some of those are, you know, co-led, you know, we're funding co-present Indigenous rangers and participants. You know, they're co-presenting with the lead scientists as well, up on stage as equals, you know. So those sort of things have been cool to watch. And, you know, always think about when you're going to that community, it's been spoken about before, is what can you offer that community? You know, can you offer them answers to their questions? Can you offer them training? Can you offer them resources? So I suppose it's what can your project bring to them? And I think, especially with intellectual property as well, the mob should always own their knowledge. You know, I think that's a crucial point as well.
Yeah, really important points, Brad. And I think that's somewhere for me where we look at, that's definitely where the future is in this section of Indigenous led and owned, and how we develop that as scientists. Hugh and Willie, I mean, this talks to this question, but also to a question that's within the chat. How were you able within the Tiwi project to integrate traditional ecological knowledge alongside the Western science? How did you align Willie's priorities or Tiwi's priorities with your own research priorities, Hugh?
I guess it's a tricky one to answer. Trying to summarize such a long,
complex question.
Yeah. You know, I would just take guidance from Willie. If, you know, in terms of significant places where I could and couldn't go, I'd always leave that up to Willie in that. You know, in terms of traditional ecological knowledge, I also saw a lot of my work as, you know, answering answering questions for, you know, Tiwi Land Council and the broader community to do with what they want. So yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that, but Willie, give us a hand.
Well, you know, obviously when you try and say Indigenous led and owned, you know, it's very tough. Like, I mean, you know, I mean, we don't have a lot of our mob that go up to PhD and wanting to do these sort of things, but I think my guy, you know, obviously, you know, I'm happy to work in partnerships, but you know, it'd be great if we can actually lead to the type of work that Cara from the NEF side of things, which is, you know, she climbs up trees looking for, you know, sugar gliders and things like that. I don't know how she does it, but, you know, getting her to climb up them ropes and, you know, looking at tree holes and things like that. The work Alison also did around that. Yeah, it's great, but I think, yeah, look, I think around that, it's more working together and trying to get more of an understanding around, you know, both, as I said, the Western science way and Tiwi knowledge, you know, like, I mean, you know, especially, you know, your Aboriginal ways, it's always, you know, we know it, but it's the other Western science, trying to put that together. And, you know, I think that sort of can, you know, try and help maybe, you know, try and be Indigenous led and owned. But it's, I know it's hard work, the guys that they do, I tell you, it's, you know, and it's credit to them and, you know, for the work that they do, especially up in the territory here where it's, you know, very hot and humid and, you know, so it's, yeah, it's not a very pleasant time to be out camping in the bush, but yeah, like as I said to him, it's been great working together.
Yeah, great. I think it's really, really nice for all the audience to see how much of an impact actually going in as a researcher and having a genuine intention to have true collaboration with Indigenous land and sea managers has such an impact on the community and the people involved. So that's great. Thanks, Willie. Brad, did you want to jump on to the next one?
Yeah, I think the next one is also super important because, you know, you want to engage early as possible to make sure you're getting the right approvals and access you need if you want to do research. And then obviously that requires open communication and you need that prior consent to go on country. And you talked about, you know, he shadowed Willie around, you know, making sure he didn't go to places where he shouldn't have been, you know, so that's really important, especially when you're on someone else's country. And also, you know, if you require ethics approval through your university, it's something you need to consider and then work towards a, you know, a research agreement. So yeah, they're important as well.
Yeah, and sometimes that prior consent doesn't mean present consent. You might have been able to go to some country last year, but that country might be closed because of a death or something like that. So yeah, it just needs to be constant checking in. Those lines of communication need to be there, and
always, you know, Hugh always asks the question where he wants to go. Obviously you come up with the plan and, you know, and if you, and you know, I'll go to the relevant TOs of that particular area as part of my land management route, the one in between, and, you know, and then ask the question to the relevant TOs and if it's okay for Hugh and the researchers or, you know, whoever wants to go up to those country. So it's a very, you know, important thing. And obviously getting their consent to go up there, which is, and to do the work. So it's, very important.
Yeah, great. I mean, even just for me listening to this conversation now, you can really see how each of these engagement principles is interlinked with the other one. You know, they're so interconnected. You can't do one and think that you're going to do the other. You know, you're talking about your consent approval, and you can so clearly hear how that's linked back to accountability for yourself, Willie, to your community, to make sure that TOs are approved of it and that they are happy for it to go ahead.
Sometimes Tegan, sorry, Tegan, sometimes my mob, they can be funny, like it's Brad, well, good on paper, you know, but sometimes, you know, we just gotta, just, you know, like a lot of my mob, you know, it's just, they just like to say, he can go to his country, you know, like what they like. But, you know, I just want to make sure it's clear and understanding that what they're doing, it's, you know, it's appropriate.
Definitely, so important.
Yeah.
Brad?
Lucky last, communication language. And, you know, this one's probably throughout the whole process. You know, you're regularly communicating, you're communicating with the right people, and you're using the appropriate language that, you know, the people you're talking to can understand. You know, you could be talking to leaders in the community, well-educated, poorly educated, you know, children, you know, the school kids, you know, you're using different language all the time. And, you know, I think you have to be adaptable to that. And then obviously, you know, when you're communicating as well, you know, as a researcher, it's, if you're working with communities, if you've got them next to you, they're going to feel more comfortable as well to talk about their project. And, you know, once, you know, I've seen it so many times at, you know, a lot of conferences where, you know, rangers will get up with the scientists and you can't shut the rangers up, and it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Willie?
That's true, Brad. So, it's more important. So, you know, and, you know, that's one of the great things about, you know, the partnership that we have with, you know, with all researchers and people that wanting to come over to Tiwi's and wanting to do the work. It's about the language and just keeping it simple, and where we can understand, Brad, you know, like, yeah, like it's well and truly good, like if people come in and speak these big words, but, you know, from Hugh and the guys that have been over here, you know, they've come to understand, and also learning the language, which is, I think it's, you know, very important. You know, there's a few, you know, you don't have to know all the words, but, you know, just ask, you know, just some of the simple words, you know, Hugh knows them well. So yeah, and it's great. It's getting good relationship and going to schools and just like I said, the news, you know, the science reference committee we have set up and then making sure we get that communication right across everything land management, mate.
And those joint presentations that we do, Willie, like we've had rangers come down to Canberra with us and presenting together.
That's right.
So yeah, lots of different ways to do it. Yeah.
I add one thing too, you know, like if you go to some of the more, you know, potentially some of these more remote communities, English is potentially not going to be their first language. You need to think about, you know, do I need an interpreter to work with this community to go through that, you know? So that's what you need to understand early on as well.
And I think those sorts of things too, Brad, in consideration of budget, you know, if you're going to have to engage an interpreter, whether it be a language interpreter or a cultural interpreter, you know, we should be setting funds aside from that from the outset, as well as, you know, our knowledge holders and those sorts of things. So I think that's a really important point. They're
tired of doing stuff for free.
Yeah, 100%. Did anyone else have
it?
Go, Willie.
Yeah, just a quick one. Yeah. So, sorry.
Whoa, look out.
That's just going off. Yeah, it's all around. We're just at a big storm. Yeah, like, you know, you're very lucky. Like, if you come to Tiwi, obviously, you know, English is sort of the second language and a lot of, you know, as you know, like, we're pretty lucky, like, you know, a lot of my Tiwi mob, they're very understanding towards English, but like you said, Brad, when you go to other communities, you know, that like, you know, there's probably the 7th or 8th language, you know, it's in English. So yeah, So yeah, different places, different,
I've had it very easy.
Yep.
Great, fantastic, guys. I hope that everyone in the audience found benefit of just talking through each of those engagement principles and what that actually looks like on the ground. Brad, obviously the protocols in its entirety is a great starting point for researchers when developing their project. I'm just wondering, are there any other resources that any of you guys would recommend for researchers to have a look at, or any that helped inform the protocols themselves, just to point people in those places?
Yeah, look, I accessed a lot of resources through developing it, and yeah, I think Rachel's put a fair few of those resources. You know, there's AATSIS guidelines, and we've got the new one freshly released, and also Our Knowledge, Our Way in Caring for Country was a project with CSIRO and Northern Hub and NESP. So I suppose that's a great resource. It has a number of chapters and a heap of case studies. And then Terry Janke is one of the leads in this intellectual property space. So, you know, there's a few resources there in the chat you can access, and I think they're, you know, I think, and a lot of it is by learning. You know, you got to do it to experience. You got to live it, and you know, from Hugh's experience, you can see how much he's getting out of this partnership and this relationship, and you know, the friendship he's built with Willie and the respect they have, and you know, that there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, totally. So I guess that'll lead me on to one more question before we go to the open floor questions. You know, and to everyone in the panel, as professionals who've been working in this field for many years, do you have any key lessons learned or reflections on where STEM in general has come from in regards to acknowledging and integrating traditional ecological knowledge into its research agenda? You know, I guess particularly for Hugh, I was reflecting on your comments around your PhD. You know, do you think that there should be some structural changes to to PhD proposals, you know, should you have a year where you actually look at talking to people, or you know, or should you have a more flexible agenda in which you can actually adapt your research question to align better with the priorities, even though you may have already been approved for that question and funding? Be really interested in hearing everyone's thoughts.
Yeah.
Hugh, if you want to start.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, definitely through my experience, I think personally, I've been lucky. There's been lots of circumstance that has allowed us to keep this collaboration going, despite some of the structural things that are in place. And the main one is just time. Having, you know, a PhD student, you know, they're supposed to finish in 3.5 years. That rarely happens, but you know, a couple of years, it seems like a long time, but it's not. Like, to properly establish respect and relationships, that's not aligned well. And it's not just time, it's budget constraints. We talked about paying people to help and do stuff. So, you know, I'm going to sound like a just pointing holes in academia, but if we had better funding for proper time periods, then it would go a long way, I think, to fostering proper, enduring relationships, and more reliable. Like Willie and I, and the ranges we've got here after many years, but that easily could not have happened. And yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Brad, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, look, I was on a Academy of Science panel last night with 2 other Indigenous scholars, and you know, it was a lot of this stuff was popping up through all our discussion, and you know, that challenge of, I think the academies need to think about how traditional knowledge is seen. It has to be seen as an equal, and you know, the culture of science needs to change as well to start accepting traditional knowledge. And you know, why can't our elders that have all the knowledge of their country be a fellow of the Academy of Science? You know, I think that's a fair question. And you know, why is it always perceived that our knowledge is well, what we'll taught, you know, growing up, that our knowledge was myth and legend, mumbo jumbo and fables and all those sort of terms, where it moved our knowledge from scientific and evidence to fiction, you know. And I suppose that's starting to change a bit too. So as we see more of these projects aligning Western science and traditional knowledge together, creating positive outcomes to impact country for the better, I think the more we're going to see it. And those rangers that are out on country, they're making Australia look fantastic for bugger all.
So we'll go to the first question from the floor, which is from Brendan, and focusing on Brad. Brad, what do you think the biggest challenges you've seen in the relationships between Western science and Indigenous communities in the past 10 years? Is it different in water and terrestrial science? And what are the most important changes that still need to happen?
Yeah, that's a big one. How long have we got? Yeah, look, I've probably seen, there's been progress, definitely. And, you know, working with the hub, you know, I've seen it firsthand how, you know, traditional knowledge and Western science have been working together to create positive outcomes for a species or a community or their country, you know. So in the water space, it's still challenging. I chose water because I like to drink it and wash my beard and stuff like that. But I think the aspect of engagement. So, you know, you think about the last 2 years, you know, we had a mega drought. We had fish kills in the Lower Darling. It was on the front page, you know, people holding up dead big Murray cod. So water was on the table, on the front pages. Then we had these catastrophic fires that wiped water off the table, you know. So, you know, we moved from one catastrophe to the other. And I think what we've seen with the fire stuff is we've actually seen Indigenous people put on those tables, put on those expert panels. For the water one, the fish kills, there was no Indigenous people seen as experts, you know, which is quite unfortunate. But the fire issue, I was just going to call my phone. It's coming in my headphones. Sorry. What we found also was that, you know, and then we've moved into COVID. So the challenge of engagement has changed, and, you know, we can't really celebrate some of these things. But I think definitely it has improved, but we've still got a long way to go.
Thanks, Brad. Willie, what have you changed anything about your burning since working with Hugh? So have you changed anything about your traditional burning practices since working with Hugh?
Yeah, we have. So obviously we looked at that doing early dry season burning, you know, changing the methodology in terms of, obviously, you know, is one of the different things that we put in partnership with Hugh. We're looking at, you know, the impact of cats with fire. So and obviously, you know, getting, you know, obviously earning a bit of credit from it, which is great as well. But you know, it's about, you know, doing different ways of burning, which is, you know, which is great. Doing early burns, and, you know, when you're doing the dry season burn, it's just obviously just after the wet season, where the grass is sort of, you know, still a bit tinged green, but, you know, starting to dry out. So the best time for us to do burning is, say, any time between, you know, after April to June. I mean, you know, June is the best time for us. Obviously, you know, we'd like to leave it up to July, but obviously we have a cutoff date for our you know, carbon credit stuff that we do. But, you know, we definitely seeing the changes of fire, doing, you know, fire management. You know, it's, you know, it's obviously, you know, obviously with you know, having, you know, just stopping those, able to stop those really late hot fire, you know, in September, November, especially, where, you know, it can create a bit of havoc. So, yeah.
Great, thanks for that. I guess in terms of that same line of thinking, how do you, so Willie, for yourself, how do you communicate the community's science needs and interests to scientists and researchers who may want to do something useful? You know, do Tiwi Mob put out research priorities, or do you try and work with people you already know well?
Look, it's a bit of both. Obviously, especially particularly our land council or any particular traditional owners have concerns in their community or in their relevant countries, like for example, if they're finding that there's, you know, fish is dying, or the, you know, they seem to not be able to get a lot of possums, you know, when they're bush hunting or things like that. You know, they'll sort of come back to us and just sort of, you know, like, or, you know, let us know where we're able to bring it to the Science Reference Committee or our Tiwi Land Council, which is our head, you know, our boss of the land. So, and you know, in joint thing, trying to nut out the problem. And if there is that problem, we'll try and get the researchers out there, and vice versa. Or if researchers want to come out and do something on our land in terms for their PhD, we're happy to provide that as well. So, yep. So it's a two-way thing, mate. So, yeah, you know, if we ask the question ourselves, Tiwis, if any concerns, we'll raise it up. So, yeah, and there's been quite a number of those things that have happened. I think Hugh, I know Hugh was doing a lot of his work on Melville Island, but, you know, obviously we had people wanting him to come over to Bathurst to do the work that he's doing. So, and that's why he's been able to come over and do the work that he's doing on Bathurst.
Followed the lead from the feedback. A good example, Willie, is the work on climate change and turtles going on. Like turtles are your dance, aren't they, Willie?
Yeah, that's our totem, turtles.
Yeah, and Tiwi's being a really flat island, there's coastal erosion and people are worried about turtle impacts. So that's been a focus in some of the last scientific reference committee meetings is, all right, let's get some researchers out, keeping an eye on these things. And obviously there's plenty of information coming in on turtles from the broader community and stuff. And just combining those two things to make a plan for the future.
Yeah, great. And Brad, from your perspective, you know, how do you see MOB sharing their research priorities with the science community?
I think it all starts at that upfront engagement. You know, I think as you build up that partnership and that relationship and build the trust, you know, if community is saying, look, we want to know about the echidna, why is it disappearing from our country? You know,
Yep.
But, you know, a researcher might be coming to talk about the blackfish, you know, or something else, you know, a bird. And, you know, you've got to understand that they will have priorities themselves. And I think that's what the research agenda and research world needs to change. It's the way it does business, you know, and especially if they're considering working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, that they need to consider what are their objectives and their questions they want answered. And, you know, I think that's really important, especially and hopefully NESP too, when it comes along, that can change the way, you know, research at a national environmental science program level does business. Fingers crossed.
And I'll just jump in there and say how important it is for that, Brad, because they can be so different. What valued in community might be the opposite of what Western science would think. You know, it's Tom Duncan's work in NESP was really great, really gauging, you know, sitting down with Tiwi people for a long time, chatting like, what do you want, what do you value, and how do we protect those things? And you know, a classic example is the buffalo on Tiwi, Willie. You know, they hold a special place for Tiwi people now. You're not going to get much support if you want to go out there and eradicate them all. It's finding that balance, isn't it? Like, those buffalo will threaten other important species, but they're important themselves. So,
and the horses as well.
That's right. Navigating through all the different values and
I think it points to, you know, having a really open strategic conversation at the start of a research priority to say, look, you know, obviously we're going to come with different values. Where do we align? Where do we misalign? And kind of strategically working through that before going too hard down one end that's not going to be right. Just a reminder to the people, to the audience, we've got about another 10 minutes left of open Q&A. So if you have any other questions that are burning, feel free to chuck them in the Q&A box. I'll move on to another question. The question is, having lots of cups of tea is great, but in many cases, researchers have to spend short periods of time on country and within community. Does anyone have advice for maintaining relationships if researchers can't be there that often? You know, obviously with Willie's issues today, jumping on the phone and Zoom chats aren't always the best. So I guess, how do we move past some of those barriers? Hugh, you're nodding. You can jump in if you want.
Oh, well.
Or Willie, you go for it.
Oh, well, just quickly, I could say, look, as you know, like, it's probably like Brad, if anybody's got a bit of a suggestion or idea, especially with PhD students wanting to do something, you know, or researchers, don't be afraid. Just go through the Land Council, and, you know, who we have an environmental officer as part of their role, and they look at those sort of things, and obviously they feed that message down to us. So, you know, it just sort of works that way. You know, or through our science reference committee, obviously.
It's a really good question. This year's been a good example of that with COVID and stuff. I've made it out to the Tiwis twice this year, which is much less frequent than normal. Like, I have moved to the other side of the country, but I still had planned to, you know, head out there a lot more often. And I think it'd be really tough to, especially if you haven't been there long, if you're expected to develop these relationships without the ability to sit down for long periods of time and have good cups of tea, it's going to be, I don't have the answer for that. Could be really tough.
Need a bigger kettle.
A Zoom kettle.
I think too, for me, you know, this question talks to, I suppose, a fundamental principle within the protocols, which is that mutual benefits for both researchers and traditional owners. You know, and as we see, there's many hurdles for researchers to overcome in terms of, one, able to be physically present. We've also talked about, you know, funding restraints to that, and also timing. I'm just wondering from the panel whether you'd have any advice or any other barriers that you can think of that people need to be mindful of when approaching that, so that you do actually have a genuine mutual beneficial relationship.
I'll just give an example of even my current work. Like I should have submitted my PhD, but unfortunately COVID hit and pretty much cancelled my last field trip to talk to people. And, you know, universities are very risk adverse, and they don't want you going to communities, and obviously Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are high risk, and you don't want to take COVID to a community. That's the last thing a university would want to see. And I suppose it's something you need to move beyond. I don't want to change my methodology. It just wouldn't be right to not talk to people on country. You know, I can't do it on Zoom. I can't share Google Earth with them. You know, it's just not right. And I think, do we bide our time? Do we run over timeframes? And that's a challenge. You know, this COVID curveball has thrown a new spanner in the works. And, you know, we've got to think differently on how we do business, especially with the mobs. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is. You know, it's, you know, some of the younger generation are pretty good with Zoom. And, you know, Willie's under huge constraints there. He's got a massive storm bubbling around him, and he's on, you know, he's engaging, you know, but the challenge is, you know, if you want to talk to the elders, you can't do it by Zoom. It's just so hard. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely, Brad. You know, and trying to, again, sorry, and miscommunicated than before about, getting that long relationship. You just got to, you know, just keep coming. I mean, you know, we're happy to invite everybody. We're especially wanting to, you know, obviously for yourselves getting PhDs, and we can help in ways, you know, and you wanting to learn about country and vice versa. We give back, you know, what we know. So it's just a good working relationship, and just, and we're not afraid. Like we're like Brad said, we'll talk all day, mate. So yeah, it's been, you know, it's, as I said, it's just great to just keep getting that good relationship backward and forth all the time. So whether it's over the phone, you know, and having a one-on-one conversation, but, you know, it'd be an ideal world to do that, but, you know, just getting that, interaction somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has been a challenging year.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Brad, just further in terms of the protocols themselves, you talk about some of those international frameworks that you used. How well has Indigenous knowledge been really included into international initiatives like IFBES? And has this been up to standard in your opinion?
In the Australian context, we've got a long way to go. And as I sort of said, where Indigenous knowledge is and traditional ecological knowledge and biocultural knowledge, it is moving from that realm of fiction. You know, it's starting to be seen as I suppose, well, it's, in a science term, it's being validated. And I think I don't like that sort of word, but I think Indigenous knowledge is moving to the realm where it's in some parts it's equal, but we've still got that way to go. Look, the IPBES, I've had no engagement with. I had to Google it just then to see what it was. You know, and I'm involved in science and knowledge every day. So, you know, I think we need to know what's going on. The Our Knowledge, Our Way document produced, there was a link in the chat put earlier, you know, is a good document. There's international agreements that have been referenced in there that people can look at, and case studies where it's been used, where Indigenous knowledge has been used to make a difference. So I think it's building, but we've still got a long way to go. And look, the other thing is, I just want to raise too that, you know, we don't have a national Indigenous science strategy. We don't. There's a national science strategy that Australia has, and it recommends Indigenous people do STEM like women. That's all it offers us. So I suppose those sort of things need to change, and I've mentioned earlier, the culture of science needs to change as well. And I think, having a national strategy, we don't have a national Indigenous Centre of Excellence for traditional knowledge. It's something that would be beneficial to what is happening right here on this forum. That knowledge can be key part of that, and traditional knowledge is seen as an equal. That's the hope. Well, that's my list of demands anyway.
I like the list. I think you should keep circulating them. They're very good. We've got time just to finish on one last question, and then we'll look at wrapping it up. So I guess to anyone in the panel who wants to jump in, what is one of the biggest changes you would like to make? I'll start again. What is one of the biggest changes you would make to centre Indigenous knowledge, values and governance in how research is produced?
That's a tricky one. That's a big one to finish on.
Yeah, it's a huge one. I'm happy to offer my perspective.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Look, for me, I think having just started my PhD and been wanting to be involved in the space and also been involved at an international and national level through EPBC Act and all that sort of thing, I think for me, one of the first questions that should be asked is, what is the Indigenous involvement? When you're putting forward your first proposal, it should almost be, just as important as whether you're going to have to tick an ethics box or not, to actually say that you've acknowledged that, you've had some conversations before even putting a proposal forward, and really start some of these conversations from the beginning before you've even got your question in mind. I think we will actually start to see synergy between traditional ecological knowledge, Indigenous priorities and values really embedded into the core of our research.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Like, I think if it is seen as an equal and we have those steps in place, you've had your cups of tea, you've got an understanding of that community, there's trust being built. The community might say, look, we need to know about species X, and that's part of your proposal. It's making sure that Indigenous knowledge and values and people are up front in your terms of reference. And especially governments need to do that as well when they start putting out these big funding buckets of money. That traditional knowledge needs to be part of the way you do business. And, that's what I'd love to see. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And even just acknowledging the value and the size, the scale of the Indigenous estate when we're talking about funding, we look at 52% of the countries in the Indigenous estate, something like 45% threatened species range. It holds huge values. And I think more often than not in conversations that I have throughout my working career, it can be a very much box ticking exercise. I spoke to Mob, they weren't interested in this microscopic organism that no one actually knows what the real word for it is because you've told me something in Latin. So I think, all of those principles that you talked about, Brad, if they could be fundamental in the way that we change, going forward would be great. Willie, do you have anything to add?
No, in terms of, no, I agree with what was said. So, yep.
You?
No, I think it's been covered with a bit more time and money floating around. Yeah.
Awesome. Just offer one more closing remarks to anyone if they've got anything else they'd like to wrap up with before I close the session. No?
Well, look, I could probably just say something if you want to. And like I said, look, I don't have, me ranges. We don't have the university thing, but we're hoping that our knowledge on land and country is beneficial for you guys when as you guys have a lot more, obviously, in terms of the learning part of it, coming over and bringing your knowledge with that, and we're hoping that our knowledge that we're telling you is enough to, like Brad said, trying to implement something like that up there with the science and our Tiwi way of working on the ground. yeah, so just having that collaboration.
My last 2 cents is how amazing it is. I count my blessing. I just love being able to work out on the Tiwi.
Sorry, that's it.
You know, I see us as doing rewarding work together, with great people involved in absolute paradise. It's like, it's just the best. It's not just a highlight of my work. It's a highlight of my life. Working out on Tiwi with everyone. I love it. So anything that can bring more collaborations up would just be amazing.
Awesome. Thanks so much to all of our speakers and panelists. I think it was a great discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We're now opening up the chat back up for anyone who's got any final thoughts or comments to pop up for the panelists. I'd also just like to quickly thank the girls who've been working very busily in the background, and I'm sure all of you will attest, without whom this would not be possible. Heather, Natasha and Rachel, thanks so much. And also just a reminder to everyone that the next webinar series will bring Indigenous knowledge and respect for culture into schools will be on next Tuesday, and it starts an hour after this one. You can check that out in the rest of the series and the link that's in the chat box. When the audience logs out, you'll see an option to link feedback in your browser window. We'd appreciate any feedback that you give. It really helps us improve events as we move forward. And we'll also be sending around a resource pack and link to this recording so you can follow up with more information. You know, thanks again for all of you guys coming along and bringing your great questions. And it was so nice to see mob from all across the country, from Larrakia to, I can't even think of another one that we had. Ewan, I think, was on there. Awabakal was on there. It was really great having you all. Look, and we really look forward to seeing you guys as attendees at the next webinar. So thanks so much.
Thank you.